Good evening, Dave Larson, Superintendent. Welcome. It's my privilege to kick off this marquee GPS event. It's so exciting to have two renowned authors who have been here before, Julie Lythcott-Haims and Daniel Pink, two famous authors who will be interviewing each other. First, I just want to welcome everyone back to another school year. It feels so good to be in person. In fact, some days I get teary-eyed. It's so exciting to be in and around the campuses, seeing the sports, activities, clubs, and all the activity. And with that is our GPS events. And what we learned from the last 2 years is Zoom is a big feature for our Glenn Bard Parent Series, to be able to, in the comfort of your home, Zoom in and participate and listen and learn and grow. So before I introduce our speakers, let me turn it over to Gilda, who will give some background on upcoming events.
Thanks, Dr. Larson. If you are a first timer to the Glenn Bard Parent Series, welcome. If you've been here many times before, welcome. Thank you so much for giving us this hour of your time. I promise you, you will walk away with something, and the something can be everything. So excited about tonight's program and so glad you are here. Go to the website, glenbardgps.org, and you'll take a look at this beautiful brochure of all of our 50 programs. And let me tell you about what's coming up. Next week, we're welcoming Anya Kamenetz, who is an NPR reporter, has a very important book, The Stolen Year, How COVID Changed Children's Lives and Where We Go Now. The week following, we'll be having our fall community read, The War for Kindness by Jamil Zaki, a Stanford University professor, The War for Kindness, Building Empathy in a Fractured World, on September 14th, 7 p.m. And then as part of Suicide Prevention Month, also very excited to welcome Dr. Harold Klopowitz. He is the director of the Child Mind Institute. He'll be talking about his book, More Than Moody, and the topic is suicide. Let's talk about it. If you are a social media person, please like us and please do share. GPS is for everyone, everywhere. Your brother who lives in Poughkeepsie or sister who lives in Rockford, Illinois, please do share. Special thanks to all the sponsors who make this possible. We couldn't do it without you. Back to you, Dr. Larson.
Thank you, Gilda. I want to introduce our amazing speakers tonight. Daniel Pink is the author of 5 New York Times best-selling books about business, work, creativity, and behavior, including the latest, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward, which is the topic of tonight's GPS discussion. The book overturns the conventional wisdom about our most misunderstood emotion and shows how regret, properly handling, points the way to a life well lived. Dan is hosted in person at a GPS most recently in 2018 at the release of his important book, Win, The Secrets of Perfect Timing. His other New York Times bestseller, including A Whole New Mind, Drive, and To Sell as Human. I just got to jump in, Whole New Mind. Dan, you were in my graduation speech back 17 years ago when the book came out to the 80 seniors in the little district in northern Michigan. So Dan's outstanding books, and he's been around a while. Dan's books have won multiple awards and have translated into 42 languages. Pink has changed the way we live by changing how we think. He has appeared frequently on NPR, PBS, ABC, CNN, and other TV and radio networks in the US and abroad. He received a BA from Northwestern University, where he was a Truman Scholar and was elected to Phi Beta Kappa and earned his JD from Yale Law School. Dan will be in conversations with Julie Lythcott-Haims. Julie is the best-selling author of How to Raise an Adult, an award-winning memoir, Real American, and the groundbreaking Your Turn, A Frank Guide to Adulthood. Julie's been here before presenting that. She's a graduate of Stanford University, where she's served as a dean, Harvard Law School, and she earned her MFA in writing from California College of Arts. Like Dan, Julie is a favorite of GPS, again, having hosted 4 times before. And we are delighted to welcome both of them back for what promises to be a stimulating conversation. Take it away, Julie.
Well, all right. Dr. Larson, thank you so much. Gilda Ross, thank you so much. The good people of Glenbard, Illinois, it is so great to be with you again. I went to high school a couple hours north of you in Wisconsin, and I just love being near the Midwestern way of speaking. It really warms my heart. I'm a Californian now. I'm coming to you from a hotel room in Massachusetts where I'm giving a talk tomorrow. I know Dan joins me in being delighted to be here. I want to open by letting you all know that it's not just an honor to be back with GPS, which, by the way, is one of the nation's, I'm about to say you're the best parent ed program in the nation. Let me put it this way. Nobody's better than you. There may be a handful that are right up there. I don't want to offend anybody, but nobody does it better than Gilda Ross. And you may not realize that when you live there, because you're like, this is the parent ed that we got. I'm telling you, you got something special. So when Gilda asks, I want you to say yes. Dan Pink is all the extraordinary things that Dr. Larson mentioned, but I want to just give a personal flavor to this. Dr. Larson said Dan Pink has changed people's lives and the way we think. And I'm going to tell you, he changed my life. Once upon a time, I was a college dean witnessing a problem on college campuses like mine, where young people were overmanaged, micromanaged by parents. And I began speaking publicly about my concern about what was happening. And Dan heard me speak one day, and he asked me if I was thinking of writing a book, and I wasn't. I didn't think I could write a book. I hadn't the furthest clue how to write a book, but he looked me in the eye and he said, I think you have a book in you. And if you ever decide you do, I'll help you. 2 years later, I called him up. I'm not sure if you remember me, Mr. Pink. I'm Julie Lythcott-Haims. You told me, and he was like, I remember. And then we sat down, we had a half hour, maybe hour-long phone call where he walked me through how you go from the idea of, I have a concern, a nonfiction issue, I want to help people, how you go from that to ultimately having a book. So this book, my first book, How to Raise an Adult, exists because Dan Pink saw potential in me, and he became a mentor to me. And so can you imagine my joy at getting asked by Gilda to join Dan in conversation tonight about his newest book, The Power of Regret. I've got a blurred background, so let me get off this blurred background so I don't fail to show you the jacket of this amazing book. So that's what we're here to talk about. So Dan, let's open with, well, first of all, we're both two recovering lawyers. I noted that from the intro, right?
Yeah, no, I sometimes forget that, Julie, every time I see you. It just goes, you just don't read to me as a traditional lawyer. But I have to say, I'm pumped to be here too, because I'm going to share your kudos about Glenbard's parents group. There might be a tie for the gold medal. They might have broken the tape at the same time, but I don't think anybody's going to push them into even the silver. And so I'm with you on that. And it's a joy to be with you. I love all three of your books. I love, obviously, How to Raise an Adult, I think is one of the most important books of the last 10 or 15 years. Real American is a great book. I mean, it has such a really powerful voice. And then in your turn, I gave that to one of my kids. So anyway, so we can just continue for the next hour to have a mutual admiration society, or
we're going to talk about this.
Let's talk about regret. Let's talk about school. Let's talk about education.
Okay.
Let's talk about how to raise adults. Let's talk about anything that's on your mind.
So here's the thing. We want to make good use of your time, everybody. I'm looking, we got 85 people here, which is phenomenal. I'm not going to assume everybody knows Dan Pink already, even though he is famous internationally. I'm guessing a few of you are here. You're like, who? Let me learn more about this guy that everybody lauds. So Dan, let's give you the opportunity to tell us who you are, not the bio level that Dr. Larson read, but sort of how did you become the person who decided to write books that really sit atop of social science research? And sometimes you do the research yourself. You're this person who kind of examines human condition, human nature, human behaviors, and then you explicate, you explain, you have this really deft way of kind of bringing research to a place where regular folks can grapple with it. digest it, and ultimately change their lives. So tell us how you became fascinated by the work that ultimately led to this particular work.
Yeah, I mean, I think thank you for that way of posing the question. I mean, I think that I came to it in the way that many people come to things, especially as adults, and I think it's an important lesson for our kids is that we come to it in a zigzaggy, half-assed, erratic, non-linear way. All right, and so I mean, I wish there were. I mean, I could go back and carefully embroider a logical story about how I got from A to B to C, but that's not the truth. The truth is that it very, very briefly is this. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, not Chicago, but I went to Northwestern. So I'm familiar with the suburbs of Chicago. I spent 4 lovely years there. Like Julie, I was a middle-class kid from the Midwest. So without but who got good grades. So because of that and not having any direction, I went to law school. And then I realized that I pretty soon that I didn't want to practice law, be a lawyer. I was interested in politics. I worked in politics for a while. I was a speechwriter. And here is the way I think we can derive some message, some learning from this twisted tale, is that from the time I was really in high school, certainly in college and law school and whatever, I was always, quote unquote, writing on the side. I was writing magazine articles and newspaper articles and things like that. And I never thought about myself as a writer. I never thought that was what was going to be my profession. But after literally 10 or 15 years of quote unquote doing it on the side, I discovered in my early 30s, like, hey, maybe I'm a writer. Maybe that's who I am. Maybe that's what my deal is. And so, in about a little over 20 years ago, I decided to go out on my own and see if I can make a living as a writer. My wife kept her job. She kept her health insurance. And we said, let's take a couple of years and see if I can make it as a writer, pursuing the things that I was interested in. And what I was ultimately interested in, I guess, were 2 things. Number one was work, because I think that work especially is a brilliant way to examine the human condition, because we spend over half of our waking hours there. It's groups of people coming together, sometimes willingly, sometimes not willingly. There are hierarchies, there's status, there's the whole megillah of human relations there. And then, again, to make a long story even longer, when I was in college, as Dr. Larson mentioned, believe it or not, I was a linguistics major. And I was actually deeply interested in social science. But of course, I'm not going to go get a PhD in social science. Who the hell does that? So, but again, that was actually a deep, deep interest in mine. And if there's a way to combine it, sort of writing interesting stories about people's real lives, built on the evidence and yielding useful tips, that I discovered was in my 30s, kind of what I did.
And we're delighted that you discovered that, because you really have shaped the understanding of the human population in the latter part of the 20th and this early part of the 21st century, which is pretty freaking awesome for a guy with a zigzaggy, half-assed, non-linear way of thinking. I quoted you. I wrote it down. So now, you know.
But you know what? For all of you, but here's the thing. I'm always wanting to sort of surface what the lesson here is, and I think the lesson is for especially for young people, and the lessons for parents is not to sort of delude our kids or to sell our kids a bill of goods, that they have to have it all figured out, that their trajectory is going to be smooth and linear and non-zigzaggy and non-half-assed. And one thing that I do with young people sometimes is I encourage them to say, go find someone, a Julie, a Dr. Larson, whoever, a Gilda, someone you admire, someone say in their 40s or 50s whom you admire, who's doing something cool. Say, God, I'd love to be able to do that. And if you can't, talk to that person and ask them, how'd you get to be doing what you're doing? And 9 times out of 10, people are going to say, the cool people, the interesting people, the impactful people are going to say, it's a long story. Right. And they're going to draw the zigzag that you're doing and so forth. And so I think that that's one of the things that we can actually, help our kids. It's like, we're all, it's not linear. We're discovering who we are. Right.
Exactly.
Things change. The person you are today is not the person you're going to be in 10 years.
Right.
So.
Right. And looking backwards, it seems to make sense. You can connect the dots looking backwards, of course, because they all did lead somehow to this. But from the front end, if you were to say, I'm going to be a this, and then I'm going to be a this, and then I'm going to be a this, nobody would say that makes sense. So thank you for underscoring that lesson. Let's turn to this book. Okay. The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. You open by saying, way too many people on the planet have a tattoo that says no regrets. It has become a mantra. It is what people stitch on their jeans jackets. It's, it's this thing that people embrace, and they feel bold and smart, and edgy by saying no regrets. But you open this book by saying, you know what, people, that's problematic. Let's start there. What was that no regrets declaration about, and why is it not helpful?
Well, I think it's about, I think the reason it's not helpful is because it is scientifically wrong and actually horrible advice for leading your life. What we know from 50, 60 years of science, and when I say science, I mean a whole different bodies of science: social psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, developmental psychology. What we know very clearly is that everybody has regrets. Everybody has regrets. It is one of the most common emotions that human beings have. It's arguably the most common negative emotion that human beings have. It is ubiquitous in the human experience. And the only people who truly don't have regrets are 5-year-olds, because their brains haven't developed, people with certain kinds of neurodegenerative diseases and brain lesions, and sociopaths. Everybody has regrets. If you truly don't have regrets, it's a sign of a potentially grave disorder. Now, why do people say that? I think that they say it in part, or in large part, because they've been sold a bill of goods. They've been sold a bill of goods. They've been sold a bill of goods that says that you should be positive all the time and never be negative, that you should always look forward and never look back. And what the science tells us is that that is not quite right. What we should be doing is not ignoring our regrets, not putting our finger, blah, 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 I don't have any regrets. I don't have any regrets. That's a bad idea. That leads to delusion. It's also terrible if we wallow in our regrets, if we ruminate in our regrets, if we stew on them.
Don't jump ahead. Don't jump ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so regrets are important. They're valid. If you don't have them, it means you're a 5-year-old child, you're a sociopath, or you have a brain lesion. The rest of us, we have regrets, and we need to go ahead.
And people say they don't have regrets, and I want to be empathetic with that claim. That people are not like trying to delude other people. They're not bad people saying that.
Right.
It's just that we've sold them a bill of goods that you need to be positive all the time and never look backward. And in a sense, it's actually a kind of a performed courage. People think that they're showing courage by saying that, and
right.
I understand that. But real courage is looking your regrets in the eye and doing something about them.
Right.
And when we do that, there's an array of benefits.
Right. Okay, so let's briefly define what is regret. You've defined it as a negative emotion. We have a lot of negative emotions. Tell us where it sits in this batch of things that we don't really want to admit we feel. What is regret versus the other emotions that are maybe near it?
Sure. That's an important distinction. So let's be clear. Regret is an emotion, all right? It's an emotion that makes us feel bad. I've begun to rethink a little bit, Julie, some of my own terminology of negative and positive emotion, and almost want to think of it as like pleasant or unpleasant emotions.
Yeah. Okay.
But so regret is unpleasant. It doesn't feel good. I don't like experiencing regret. Okay. So how is it different from some other emotions? Let's take disappointment. And this is important. The difference between regret and disappointment is that regret is your fault. All right. Regret requires agency. And my favorite example, it's a parental example, is from Janet Landman at Michigan, who says that to show the difference between regret and disappointment, regret requires agency. Regret is your fault. So she tells a story of like a little girl, maybe a 6-year-old girl or 5-year-old girl who loses her first tooth. She loses her tooth. She goes to sleep. Before she goes to sleep that night, she puts her tooth under the pillow for the tooth fairy. She wakes up in the morning and the tooth is still there. She's disappointed, but her parents regret not replacing the tooth with a few quarters. All right. And so regret requires agency. It makes us feel bad. And it's also requires incredible cognitive capacity, because what we do is we look backward on something we've already done. We sort of get into our mental time machine. We climb in it. We go backward. Then, and this is the crazy part, we negate what really happened. We sort of change the events. But wait, there's more. Then we get back in our time machine to the future, but suddenly the future looks different because we reconfigured the past. So it's an incredibly cognitively complex emotion that makes us feel bad because of our own actions.
Okay, and that's why 5-year-olds can't do it because they don't yet have the capacity
Exactly.
to go back in time. And okay, I love that. You actually
Exactly.
call it time travel and you call it magic, and
Yeah.
you have this term counterfactual. So if we did A and then we got to B, the time travel is I'm going to go back and imagine an alternative A that gives me an alternative B, which you call counterfactual. And you say that we can have regrets that are if only this had happened, regrets, versus at least, at least versus if only. Why don't you tell us what the distinction there is? Because one turns out to be a whole lot better than the other.
Yeah, well, they turn out to be very different. They serve different purposes and they evoke different feelings. So we, as exactly as you say, a counterfactual, we can, with our incredible minds, our incredible brains, we can imagine a set of facts that run counter to what actually happened. So there are two kinds of counterfactuals. One of them is known as a downward counterfactual, where you imagine how things could have turned out worse. I shouldn't have married Ed, but at least I have these two great kids. I'm finding the silver lining. I'm imagining how things could have turned out worse. We can also do an upward counterfactual. That's how we imagine how things could have turned out better. If only I'd married Esteban rather than Bob, I would be living in a nicer community. All right. So you imagine how things could have been better. And here's what we know: at least make us feel better, but they don't help us do better. If onlys make us feel worse, but they can help us do better. And they can help us do better by making us feel worse. What's more is that if onlys are way more common, that you and I and every other human being is much more likely to do an upward counterfactual if only than a downward counterfactual at least.
Okay, we're going to get to how we can actually use regret to teach us and fuel us. We'll save that for in a bit. We need to continue to unpack what we've got going on here. So you've identified 4 big types. So typical Dan Pink, he goes and looks at the data, he looks at studies, he looks at meta studies, he's diving into the muck of the data of human existence. And he's kind of like, wait a minute, these data are unsatisfactory. We have to be better at assessing what's going on here. I'm sort of fast forwarding, and certainly clarify anything that I'm getting wrong, but essentially, you put together this survey, the American Regret Survey. There was also something called the World Regret Survey. So you were doing some of your own work. You're also digging into other people's work, and you start to isolate different kind of categories, big types of regret. And I'd love for you to tell us what those different categories are and, how they differ from one another.
Sure. So thank you for mentioning the research. So I did 2 things. One, as you say, the American Regret Project. That was just a giant public opinion survey, the largest public opinion survey of American attitudes on regret ever conducted. I asked people a bunch of questions about regret, and we did a very, very large sample so we could find demographic differences. And I actually had people list a regret and then put it into a category like career or romance or finance or that kind of thing. And I found in that survey, my robust and powerful conclusion was that people regret a lot of stuff. All right. So that's kind of unsatisfactory. What I also did, which turned out to be revelatory, was I did something called the World Regret Survey, as you say. And that was just a giant collection tool. And right now we have collected over 21,000 regrets from people in 109 countries. So all of you listening here today can go online, worldregretsurvey.com, if you're interested. And you can add your regret if you're interested, or you can look at other people's regrets. And what I found there when I read through these regrets, again, I haven't read through all 21,000, but I truly did read through the first 15,000 of them. And what I found is that around the world, people seem to have the same 4 core regrets. And they're not about the domain of life. They're about something deeper. And I'll go through them very, very quickly here. One of them is what I call foundation regrets. Foundation regrets are, if only I'd done the work. These are regrets that people have about spending too much and saving too little, about not taking care of their health, about not working hard enough in school. Small decisions early that accumulate to terrible consequences later. Second category, boldness regrets. again, one way to think about this, I guess, is that every regret begins at a juncture. And this juncture is you can play it safe or you can take the chance. You can play it safe or you can take the chance. And when people don't take the chance, not all the time, but a heck of a lot of the time, most of the time, I think, they regret it. And so these are people who regret not traveling, people who regret staying in a lackluster job and not starting a business. Huge numbers of regrets about people who regret not asking somebody out on a date years ago. I mean, I got hundreds of those around the world about not asking somebody out on a date. So boldness regrets, if only I'd taken the chance. Moral regrets, a good one, small category, but kind of interesting. If only I'd done the right thing. These are people who regret huge numbers. I mean, again, relevant for this audience, huge numbers of regrets about bullying, a lot of regrets about marital infidelity, other kinds of things. And then finally, our connection regrets, which are about relationships, but not only romantic relationships. In fact, in some ways, mostly not romantic relationships, but about the full spectrum of relationships in our lives that often will come apart, often will just drift apart. Somebody wants to reach out. They don't because they feel awkward. They think the other side's not going to care. So the drift continues, and then it's often too late and they regret it. And so connection regrets are, if only I'd reached out. And with remarkable similarity, these are what people around the world seem to regret. And it's kind of amazing to me. I didn't expect this, just how universal these regrets are.
And what you also didn't expect, and I'm going to read from page 74. This is really the best thing. Like, I know you since you began mentoring me in 2012. And all of a sudden I'm on page 74 and I'm like, oh, sweetie, because you say,
I gotta see what's on 74.
You say, when I was analyzing entries in the World Regret Survey, I felt less like I was studying our most misunderstood emotion and more like I was operating a gigantic online confessional. And I was like, dude, of course, you ask people to share their regrets and you're surprised that they confess. And this is me chuckling because I'm a memoirist, so I dwell in the space of, right, let's talk about what we're feeling. Let's try to make sense of it. Let's, process it that way. Maybe we can help others by daring to open up. So this is my regular work. And so I was chuckling. You got a lot of confessionals. What a surprise. Humans, if you give them the opportunity, they feel safe, like in an anonymous survey, and you say, what do you regret? They're going to tell you because they need to tell you for reasons you're clear on, right? That's how they're going to process it, need it out of their soul by actually telling it to somebody.
See, you have good gut instincts on this. My gut instincts on this were not. I honestly, Julie, I was surprised by the volume of responses that we got. I was surprised by the vividness, by the almost the nakedness, the authenticity of a lot of these responses. I'll give you one interesting factoid here. It just shows you how much my suspicions were off. The World Regret Survey was entirely anonymous. All I wanted from people was their gender identity, their age, and their location. But I gave them the option of opting in and leaving their email address if they wanted to be contacted for a follow-up interview. All right. But that was totally optional. That was, they had to opt in. They had to affirmatively say, yes, I want to put here's my email address. I want to include it so you can contact me for a follow-up interview. I was hoping to get maybe 5 or 6% of the sample opting in. We got like 32% opted in. So what you have, I mean, again, memoirists understand this, which is why we need to talk to people in different realms, is like, yes, I want to tell a complete stranger my biggest regret. And I want to give my email address to that complete stranger so you can talk to me some more about my biggest regret, about my infidelity, about my bullying somebody, about my deep disappointment in myself, about my lack of conscientiousness.
Yeah. And look, this is the one difference between you and me. I think you reveal in these pages that your proclivity, your propensity in life has not been to be the mushy, touchy, feely, gooey, emotional guy.
No way.
Right. And yet this book and this project has shown you, first of all, that you're safe in these, like you can handle it. I don't know how you dealt with all that you've been reading, but you seem to be fine. You seem to be, you got a book out of it. I mean, it seems to have been a good thing. Like you discovered, hey, I can handle holding space for humans to share stuff. And sorry, Gilda, I'm swearing. I'm getting too excited. So you grew as you did this? Things surprised you and you were able to be open to like, whoa, I didn't expect this at all, but I'm going to make room for it to be possible and true, and I'm going to keep going. And I really applaud you for that. Let me say that at the heart of this is that emotions matter. And I want you to take us now to the fallacy around feelings. In order for people to take this book that everybody should buy right now, by the way, and actually, ingest it. It's a quick read. It's a very beautifully written, and it's a real how-to. Like you're gonna feel supported and served as you go. People need to be okay with feelings, and the reason I'm sort of drawing out this, like you weren't even expecting all these feelings. All the feelings came in the regret survey. The reader, the person you aim to serve with this book, needs to know like your feelings are all right, person. Okay. And you walk us through that by describing that sometimes people ignore feelings and sometimes people ruminate in their feelings. And there's a third space that is the healthy way to deal with feelings. So walk us through those three ways of being with feelings that ultimately lead you to that beautiful phrase about feeling to thinking to doing.
Yeah, and I think this is really central, and I think like in my previous writing, I really didn't write enough about emotions. I'm sort of missing that whole because I sort of fell into this trap. So there are different ways to think about, and when I say emotions, I'm really talking about these negative, unpleasant emotions. I think people are okay with positive emotions, right? They don't have any. I'm feeling joy. Oh, that's so terrible. What should I do with this feeling of joy? Bask in it, enjoy it, right? So, but with negative emotions, with unpleasant emotions, we don't know what to do. And I think this is especially true with our kids. Like we don't tell our kids what to do with these things. So one possibility is that we say, wait a second, feelings are BS. Feelings aren't real. Feelings are not meaningful. I'm going to ignore them. So if I have a feeling, because I'm a human being, I'm going to put my fingers in my ears. I'm going to try to drown out the sound. And I'm going to ignore it because I don't take feelings seriously. They're nonsense. They're not meaningful signals. That's a bad idea. That's a really bad idea. Now, there's the other side of it, which also worries me, which is that feelings are the one truth. Always trust your feelings. Feelings are the central truth to the human condition. And that's dangerous too, because what often happens, especially when we don't know what to do with our unpleasant feelings, is that they capture us. And I see this happening all the time with young people. They capture us. They bring us down. They pin us down. We're stuck in them. We're in the muck of them. That's bad too. What we want to do is use feelings as these negative feelings as signals, as information, as data, as a knock at the door. Clunk, 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 clunk. Hi, I'm a negative emotion. I'm here to tell you something. Okay, I'm not going to freak out and dive under the couch. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to close the door and say, this is nonsense. This is not meaningful. I'm going to say, oh, really? What do you have to tell me? And when we do that, what we have, especially in social psychology, but some other fields, is an array of evidence showing that it can make us better. It can make us sharper thinkers. It can make us better negotiators, better problem solvers, find more meaning in life. But what we have to do is we have to recognize that feeling isn't for ignoring. Feeling isn't for feeling. Feeling is for thinking. Feeling is as a signal. And when we do that, and it's not that hard, we get better at that. And here's the thing. I had never been very good at that. It took me this book to really sort of put this map in my head of how to contend with this. But I think that this is, and I think that a problem we have, and Julie, you've written about this a lot. You saw this when you were at Stanford as the dean of freshmen. Young people get hijacked by these negative emotions. So they feel a negative emotion, regret, or even fear or shame or something like that, and they get brought down by it because they say, wait a second, this is weird. I'm supposed to be positive all the time. Everybody else is positive. Everybody else's life is perfect. There must be something wrong with me, and that causes this collapse. And what I want is a more thoughtful response. Just thinking about it, sort of not minimizing it and not demonizing it, but just recognizing it and saying, clunk, 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 to knock on the door. I'm going to open the door, see what it has to say.
So you basically, after laying out what regret is and the various types, these 4 deep types of it, and the fact that feelings are a valid aspect or part of the process of ultimately being a thinker and a doer, someone who has control over some aspect of one's life. You then really walk us through how to deal with the regret. And I have to tell you, I have a mindfulness practice, and I don't know if folks listening have any relationship with that concept, but it's, I was taught by a coach 15 years ago how to really begin to be aware of the feelings that my body was signaling to me and decide what to do with them instead of like acting on them, with anger or impulsivity or what have you. And so I found that you never used the word mindfulness, but I felt that you were describing a very similar process. You have this 3 steps basically of disclosure, self-disclosure, self-compassion, and distance. These are sort of this journey you take when you've got a thing you're regretting. And we should talk here about the difference between actions you regret versus inactions, but whether you did something or you didn't do something and you regret it, and now you're trying to sort of deal with it and move on, and maybe even have it be of use to you. You describe this 3-step process. So walk us through what self-disclosure is around the regret, self-compassion, which is the middle step, and then distance.
Yeah, I've sort of, it's like any good writer, I've been sort of rewriting in my head since the book came out. And so I've sort of refined things a little bit. And I tend to look at it like slightly differently from what I wrote. Not that should detract you from picking up a copy of this book, but I did it slightly different. So I think of it now as kind of inward, outward, forward, inward, outward, forward. So inward is the first step is how do we think about the regret and ourselves? And what we see is that when we make mistakes, when we screw up, when we have a regret, mistakes, whatever, the way we talk to ourselves internally is brutal. If we were to broadcast people's self-talk, if you were to broadcast my self-talk, you would think I was a nut. You would think I was like a vicious, mean nut, the way that I talk to myself. All right. And so there's a whole line of research on self-compassion from pioneered by Kristen Neff at the University of Texas. Basically, what it says is that don't do that. OK, instead, treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. And this is something that I think people have a surprisingly hard time doing. They treat themselves in ways they would never treat somebody else. And what the self-compassion research tells us is don't treat yourself better than anybody else, but don't treat yourself worse than anybody else. There's no positive benefit to that. So when we treat ourselves with kindness rather than contempt, we recognize that our mistakes are part of the human condition. When we recognize that any slip up or mistake is a moment in our lives, not the full measure of our lives, that can basically open the way for some sense making. So that's the inward. The outward has to do with what we were talking about before, Julie, which is disclosure. I mean, as you know, as a memoirist and as someone who, spent a decade in a role that was, quasi counselor pastoral, where people are coming to you and disclosing, you understand that viscerally in a way that I didn't. But, when we disclose, it's an unburdening. But there's something else I think even more interesting going on when we write about. Here's the thing: our negative emotions, our emotions in general, emotions by their nature are abstract. They're abstractions. They're vaporous. Okay, there's like they're like a haze. All right, that's what makes positive emotions feel so good. But it's what makes negative emotions feel so bad. And so when we talk about our negative emotions, when we write about our negative emotions, we convert that hazy abstraction into concrete words. That makes it less menacing and also begins the way towards sense making. So we go inward, outward, and then forward is we have to extract lessons from our experiences. And once again, we face a problem. We're terrible at solving our own problems. We're good at solving problems in general. We suck at solving our own. We stink at solving our own problems because we're too close to them. We're too caught up in the details. So what we want to do is something called self-distancing, where you take a step back and in some ways analyze your problems as if they were someone else's problems. And when we do that, these things, treat ourselves with kindness rather than contempt, disclose and convert to language to defang the regret, to make sense of it, and then take a step back and draw a lesson from it. These regrets become the fuel for moving forward. And it's really not super difficult. Now, we do have traditions. Mindfulness is one of them. Cognitive behavior therapy is one of them. Even certain kinds of religious traditions give us this kind of ritual or process for dealing with negative emotions. But in general, most of us are left adrift. That's the thing that is really frustrating to me. So everybody's experiencing this emotion of regret, but we never give people instruction of what to do. So instead, you get a bunch of people plugging their ears and a bunch of people cowering in the corner, but not enough people saying, oh, okay, this is trying to tell me something. Let me go through the process and extract a lesson from it and do better in the future.
So this book is peppered with real life examples. Dan has shared that he conducted this massive survey of his own and is also tapped into data collected by other people. And the book is beautifully constructed with little tiny statements of regret. Every chapter opens with 3 or 4 statements. And just that alone, y'all, is great reading because you feel less alone or less of an outlier when you read all of these things that humans around the globe, all age levels, have regretted. And so it's a self-help book in that sense, just because you're reading what other people have dared to disclose. And I think where I want to go with this is, sorry, I just lost my track of thought for a second, but you tell us like how to manage the emotion that we have, which is regret. Like I did this. Oh, I know where I wanted to go. I started reading this book in preparation for this interview, probably Friday. And on Saturday, I kicked off, I'm running for local office in Palo Alto, and I had a kickoff event. I've got a team of people, a bunch of people came, and some things went great and some things went less than great. And because I was, by this point, halfway through your book, I was like using the language in the book. Like, you know what? I have some regrets. Instead of like, oh God, I was like, you know what? I have some regrets about this. We might have done this differently. And if we had, imagine how much more. And all of us, I was already incorporating it, which surprised me because I approached this book thinking, I already know a lot about this. Like Dan's going to have his take on this. But I think I'm pretty good at dealing with, and it was that accessible. And that's what I want everyone on the call to appreciate. Like this book will change how you're interacting at work, how you're interacting in your personal life with your partner, if you have one, your spouse, your kids, your best friend, your family members, right? Neighbors, all of it. We're all constantly regretting things and feeling shame, feeling like, ruminating over it or ignoring it. And Dan's book is like, hey, y'all, you're normal. You did something, maybe you didn't do something, you regret it. Good news, you can do something with that. That's what I got from this book. So there's the stuff we can do with the thing we've actually done or not done that we regret, right? The way we process it and learn from it so that next time, we make better choices. But what I really was surprised by was the Alfred Nobel story. So toward the end of the book, you talk about anticipating regret, right? There's the stuff we've already regretted, but it turns out you can imagine a future regret and live your life differently as a result. So tell us the Alfred Nobel story and how that, became this chapter for you, teaching people how to usefully anticipate regret.
Yes. So Alfred Nobel had a shock one day when he was in his 50s, I think it was. He woke up one day and he saw an obituary in the newspaper, and that's kind of shocking,
It was his obituary. Say that again.
His obituary. His obituary. He saw his obituary in the newspaper, and he hadn't died. They had confused him with his brother who had died. But what was alarming about this was the headline. In the headline, it was a French newspaper. Was I can't remember in French, but it's basically the merchant of death is dead. And he's like, what? This is how I'm going to be remembered? And now Alfred Nobel at the time was one of Europe's most famous, most wealthiest industrialists. And the industry that he created were basically things that went kaboom, dynamite famously, but not missiles, but bombs and other kinds of explosives. And he realized that his legacy was going to be as like a merchant of death. And that was kind of chilling. Like he had this sneak preview of his obituary. And he said, wait a second, I don't want to do that. Like I'm sort of anticipating how bad this is going to feel. So he ended up using that impetus as using that as the impetus to create the Nobel Prizes for accomplishments in science and humanitarian thinking. And it was that ability to anticipate the regret that he would have later on that changed the course of his life in the present. And the reason this is useful is that we don't do a great job of it, but we can do an okay job of it. We can anticipate what we might want to regret in what we're going to regret in the future, and then steer our present actions to avoid those. Now, it's an imperfect solution because we shouldn't try to anticipate every regret we're going to have. But if we do it the right way, this can actually be a very, very healthy recipe for living a good life in the moment.
Love it. So y'all, we're coming up on the time has flown. We've got another 14, 15, 16 minutes. I'm going to be looking to questions in the chat, but I have a feeling the chat feature right now, I'm not sure it's clear that folks can write to the chat. I see one person who's been writing to the hosts and panelists, but I'm not sure. Let me put it this way. If you have questions, please pop them in the chat. And if I can't see them in the chat, maybe they'll be in the Q&A. I see. Okay, there's two in the Q&A, one in the Q&A. So I will be looking there in a second. Dan, one of the themes that runs through this book is the story of Cheryl and Jen. These are dear friends who fell out of touch. And I think, for many of us, the pandemic was a real sign that we didn't have close relationships, because when we were desperately lonely and isolated and could have used a human or two, we looked around and were like, well, who are my friends? Now some people made the most of it and they reconnected with friends and with family. I met a guy on a plane out here today who said, my siblings and I began a weekly puzzle doing together online thanks to the pandemic. I instantly felt regret that I hadn't done that with my siblings. But I raised Cheryl and Jen because I think, I'm guessing there is not a single person that doesn't have an old friend somewhere where you had a falling out or just a drift, a rift or a drift, as you put it, where you're just not close anymore, but once upon a time you were. And these are the sadnesses that can be healed and repaired, and we can reach out, we can make a difference. So can you give advice for anybody here who's that's probably got to be a very common regret. It's in the category of a connection regret. This. What is your advice about how people handle that?
And you're exactly right. That was the 4 core regrets. That was the biggest category. And this is actually really important. And I can even testify to how this book changed my own behavior in that regard. So here's what happens. We have these relationships that were intact or should have been intact, and they come apart. And exactly as you're saying, Julie, a lot of times these relationships come apart in profoundly undramatic ways. They just kind of drift. And that's what happened to this woman, Cheryl, who lives in Minnesota, and her friend, Jen, who now lives in Texas. They went to college together in Iowa. They were BFFs. And then over time, they started to drift apart. And here's what happened. Cheryl wanted to reach out to Jen, but she said, as we all do, oh man, it's going to be really awkward if I reach out. And besides, she's not going to care. That is the barrier, right? We would say, oh, it's going to be really awkward if I reach out, and they're not going to care. I cannot emphasize enough how wrong both of those things are. First of all, what the research tells us is that when we do reach out, it's way less awkward than we think. And then the second thing is that the other side almost always cares. And so I think one of the interesting things, Julie, you might appreciate this as a writer. I'm interviewing these people because I interviewed about 180 of the people who submitted their email addresses. And what happened is that I would have these conversations that all over Zoom, because it was during the pandemic, that ended up starting in a journalistic way and then quickly morphing into this kind of quasi-therapeutic thing. And then what would happen is that I would interview people, and then they would change their behavior. And I would write one thing and say, hey, guess what I did? And I said, no, please, because I already wrote it. You're not telling me it went down differently. Anyway, what happened was this, and forgive this long-winded tale here. So Cheryl wanted to reach out to Jen, and she said, oh no, it's going to be really awkward, and she's not going to care. 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 And I said, Cheryl, how would you feel if today Jen reached out to you And Cheryl said, "Oh my God, I would be so touched. I would break into tears. I would find it the most moving thing that ever happened to me." And I'm like, hello. And so let's derive a takeaway here. Always reach out. If you are at a juncture, this is the lesson that I learned, Julie. If you're at a juncture and you're contemplating, should I reach out or should I not reach out? Being at that juncture has answered your question. When in doubt, reach out. And this is a really, really powerful lesson. And one other beat on this, I was talking to a whole group of George Washington University freshmen, first years, just last week. And one of the things that I said to them was that awkwardness is not a sufficient excuse. Awkwardness is a signal that you're about to learn and grow and experience something new. Push past the awkwardness. You're not allowed to use awkwardness as an excuse. Fear, sometimes that's a legitimate excuse. Awkwardness, no. Awkwardness doesn't count. Everything we know from the social science and from other experiences says, if you're feeling awkwardness, awkwardness is an opportunity. That's how I look at it. Awkwardness is an opportunity. Push past it and you'll learn and grow. So bottom line, when in doubt, reach out.
I have one of those regrets of I didn't reach out and then it became too late. And I'm just going to share it briefly because I think, some people listening can relate. I was 20 or 22. I had a summer job at Stanford after graduating. And, in a field I didn't really know, I was asked to deal with some data. It was asbestos. It was something strange in environmental health and safety. But, someone had gotten me the job. I did the job. I thought I did it well. And the summer ended and my boss had gone on vacation the last 2 weeks of my term. So I didn't really get a goodbye or an exit interview with him. And the boss, I was like a special assistant to the man who ran all of environmental health and safety, a guy named Tom. I moved to LA to do an internship with a law firm before heading to law school, which was my plan for the year following. And Tom left a message on my voicemail. "Julie, it's Tom, sorry I missed you last 2 weeks. Would love to talk with you about a few things. Give me a call." Well, I heard that voicemail and I was afraid. I thought he was going to critique me, like he was going to say something went wrong. And so I didn't call him back. He called again, left a message. I ignored it. He called a third time. And then he gave up. And for years, I remembered I never talked to Tom. I should have called Tom. And then at some point, Tom died. And I just felt such regret that I was so scared of feedback that I couldn't even call a guy back. So insecure about my own performance that I assumed it was terrible and he was calling to berate me. In all likelihood, he was calling to say, "Good job, kid. What'd you learn? And thanks for doing," and that emotion has sat with me so much that I've actually shared this story with my kids in the hope that when they find themselves in a similar fear of, that they will remember the regret that I've carried for many, many decades. Let me turn to the questions that are coming in. Somebody would like you to briefly, oh no, Jerica already handled that. Okay, the 4 types, but that's already been handled. The 4 major types of regret have been rearticulated. Dan, Jeff wants to know, of all your books, which one has had the biggest impact on your own life? And let's try to go rapid fire on this because we got about 7 minutes.
On that one, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think that it's hard to say because I think this latest one I think had a big impact because I was dealing in a realm emotions that I hadn't really dealt with before, and it really made me think hard about the rest of my life.
Okay, nice. I mean, I'm glad that this was useful to you on your journey. I'm not going to read people's names because I'm realizing they're writing to us and they may not expect that their name is going to be attached to their question. Since we're talking about regret, I don't want to create issues for anybody. So another questioner asks, what if you have a regret coming from inaction, not even trying to achieve something, but the cause of it is a strong intuitive stop or something that was holding you constantly back, a barrier that was due to a strange gut feeling or intuition?
Yeah. That's a hard one. It really depends on what kind of inaction regret it is. It really depends on like the realm of of what it is. So without knowing the specifics, it's hard to say. One of the things that we do know very clearly, though, is that as we get older, what sticks with us are those inaction regrets. When we get older, the regrets of inaction, what we didn't do, outnumber regrets of action by 2 to 1, sometimes 3 to 1. And so I think that the key there is to really question and interrogate that gut feeling. What it, basically convert that intuition into something a little bit more specific and rational, and assess that. It could be you say, you know what, I had this intuitive sense, I wanted to start a business, but I had this gut sense that I wasn't really equipped to run anything. That you could very well be right about that, but I want you to interrogate it in an interesting way. I don't want you to don't stop at the intuition, but also recognize that what sticks with us over time are the things we didn't do. And so I think there's a very strong argument to be made for having a slight bias for action, for trying stuff.
Yeah. Many people on the call are parents. And so we're getting requests for advice for how to talk to kids about this. Any insights or helpful phrases on anticipating regret with our kids, whether they're teens or college students or younger, without sounding like an old nag? You'll regret that.
Yeah.
Like, how do we say that without saying that?
I think that what you're doing, Julie, is really almost the signature tech. The one thing that you did was almost a signature technique. What we should be doing, and you said a couple of things earlier. You talked about normalizing regret, and that's exactly the mission of this body of work. Is that I want to normalize regret because it's normal. And one way to normalize regret, and I think a lot of parents know. Listen, I'm a parent. Kids don't listen to what you say, but they watch what you do. All right. And so I think that, to me, one of the single best practices is this: with your kids, or if you have a team of people at work, tell them about a regret that you have, tell them what you learned from it, and tell them what you're going to do about it. I don't think that the finger wagging, you're going to regret this, is an effective technique. But the more we talk about our regrets, normalize our regrets, but don't leave it there. We say, here's what I learned and here's what I'm going to do. That ends up being an incredibly productive conversation. And believe me, most kids, if one of their parents says, hey, let me tell you something I regret, suddenly their ears are open. And if the parents model the behavior of extracting a lesson from it to apply to the future, I think that's profoundly healthy. And the more we just in general talk about our regrets, the more we normalize them. And the more the regrets are normal, the more kids are not going to, young men and women, young people are not going to feel a sense of shame when they feel bad, as they inevitably will, because they're human beings.
We have somebody here who says they are the brother of Gilda. And besides being so proud of Gilda's brother says, my question is, I'm in my 70s and believe that finding my soulmate and wife, Jen, I truly believe that everything I have experienced in my life prior has led me to her. So everything I did, good, bad, led me to Jen. And I really don't have many regrets. Is that okay? Yeah.
Listen, of course you don't need my permission to say that it's okay. I think that the thing is that it's possible. All right. I want you to think about this. It's possible to say, hey, I like my life. I like where I am. I'm content. I'm satisfied, and still have regrets. So an example would be that, I made some bad career choices early on in my life. I did I have regrets of kindness and some other things that I did. And at some level, all of those things led me to where I am today. So would I want to not be where I am today with my family and with my life? No. But can I still learn from those things? Absolutely. I regret, this is not a huge regret, but I regret like going to law school. If I had it to do over again, I would not have gone to law school. I would have done something totally different. But here's the thing. I met my wife in law school. So if you want to give me a bargain, if the devil wants to come down or come up, wherever the devil lives, wants to come and give me a bargain and say, listen, you can redo it and not go to law school, but you can't meet Jessica. I'm saying, okay, devil, I'm not in. I don't want that bargain. But I can still say, what was the decision that I made that I regret, learn from that, and still be satisfied with my life. So it's a very normal reaction. And I think in some ways it's a way to be healthy about that. So I would advise Gilda's brother, think about one decision or indecision earlier in your life that you regret. Think about what you learned from it, and think about how you're going to do better, and talk to your beautiful partner about that, because I'm sure she'll help you.
We have a couple people who are, and Gilda, can we just go for another few minutes here? Because we got some great questions.
Oh, please do.
Good, good. We got a couple that are really in this realm of people opening up and being personal.
Nice.
One is saying, let's say you're trying to make amends. Should you contact people you have hurt? Are you invading their privacy? What about the sort of, they don't
Yeah.
want to speak on, that's what, let's hold that. Because the
Yeah.
second one is, I reached out to my stepson to try to make amends for ignoring him and his family, but the bridge was too long. We now have no relationship and I can't change it. I regret it every day. Can't get to self-compassion. Any advice? So we have one person like, both of these are in the realm of what about the negative consequences of actually trying to make the amends?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think those are two slightly different. I think those are two slightly different things. What I have seen, and I wish I had written about this, was I didn't for reasons I won't go into, is that there are people, especially in the realm of moral regrets and things like bullying, who have gone back to the people they bullied and apologize. And what I found, this is all anecdotal, what I found is that the people who were bullied were actually far less traumatized than the people who did the bullying. And so I think it's a healthy impulse. I think it's a healthy impulse. And at the very least, if you go and you seek forgiveness, or you want to get this off the chest and it doesn't work out for you, at least you've tried. You're not dealing with that uncertainty. The second one is a tough one. If you go and you try to reach out, you try to make amends and you're rebuffed, that's difficult. I think the key there is to understand, and this is really, really fundamental to regret, is understand, and I think it's fundamental in life, where we have agency and where we have control and where we don't, right? We don't have full control over everything. We don't have full control over how everybody else reacts. What we do have control over is how we react. We have control over how we assess our own emotions, but we don't have full control over everybody else. And so if you feel like you've done the right and honorable thing and you're still getting rebuffed, then at a certain point, that begins to be a little bit more like disappointment and a little bit less like regret. In the same way that I can be, and that distinction which you drew out earlier, Julie, is important. If you think about it as a prosaic example, but I'm looking at my office window is right there. If it's raining outside, I can't regret that it's raining. I didn't have any control over that. Now, if I know it's raining and I don't bring an umbrella and I get wet, I can regret that because that's on me. And so really thinking about where our agency and control begins and ends is important. And I think in that case, your regret would have been that you didn't try to reach out, but the fact that you reached out and were rebuffed in some ways is beyond your control. So it's a little bit more like disappointment. And there, I think that I actually would encourage you to look at some of this work on self-compassion.
Any advice for the people? I'm seeing a question here about the sort of agonization of, I need to call them, I need to reach out, all this inertia of we have this distance, we're in a rift or we've drifted, and the regret is saying like, get back in touch. I think you have in the book, it's like, just do it. But
yeah.
How do you just do it when for decades, perhaps you have not been able to overcome that inertia?
Do something small. Don't go buy an airplane ticket and fly to Pasadena and buy 12 roses and show up on their doorstep. Send them an email, a one-sentence email. Hi, Fred. I've been thinking about you. I regret that we were once close and we're not close anymore. I just wanted to let you know that you're on my mind. And if you happen to be interested in talking, I would love to talk. Very simple, short like that. And I think that's the way to go. And truly, I'm telling you, the experiences that I've seen is that not even 9 times out of 10, 49 times out of 50, the response to that is quite positive. It's not going to be all the time, but people appreciate you. There's this whole idea of what's called pluralistic ignorance, where we think somehow we're wildly different from other people. And so if I had somebody who I had drifted apart from or wasn't close to, who reached out to me, I can't even imagine you asked, what are you doing contacting me? I wouldn't react like that. I would say, oh, wow, that's so nice and gracious of you. I might not want to become BFFs with you for the rest of my life, but I'm going to appreciate the overture. So recognize that people are very much like you. And do anyway. The tactical move is do one small thing. You don't have to do everything. Do one small thing.
Somebody's asking, did procrastination figure into your research? And she's speaking about the I called it inertia. She's calling it procrastination.
Yeah.
As the blockade. Did you look at procrastination at all?
I didn't, but what we know about procrastination is that procrastination is basically a problem of emotion regulation. That is, the reason that we procrastinate is that we're feeling bad in some way, that there's a cloud of kind of negative emotion. In this case, the procrastination isn't the regret itself. I really do think that the procrastination is driven by it comes from feelings of awkwardness and feelings of uncertainty. And I'm telling you, if you I can't emphasize enough, based on, there's so much research on this too, but also just everybody's experience, is that awkwardness is a paper tiger. Awkwardness is a flimsy excuse. You think that it's this brick wall standing in front of you, when in fact it's this like tissue paper, and you just go boop, and you poke through it, and things are generally fine. And so I think there's a lot to be said. There's some other interesting research on this too, about the importance of reframing. Okay, so Alison Wood Brooks at Harvard has some great research showing that when people are about to give a speech or something like that, and they're feeling nervous, if you say, wait a second, I'm not feeling nervous, I'm excited, you reframe it as a positive, that people do better. There are other elements. Ali Crum at Stanford has done some work on reframing stress. Wait a second, I'm feeling stress, but actually stress can be a performance enhancer, not a performance inhibitor. And I think when we think about awkwardness, we should say, wait a second, awkwardness is an opportunity. The fact that I'm feeling awkward means that I'm on the brink of doing something new and novel and interesting and engaging.
A lot of the parents have questions about kids, and how do you this speaks to your work more broadly, I think. How do we balance goal setting with our kids, the importance of setting and working toward goals, with the reality of life, that the path to success is zigzaggy, as you spoke to at the beginning of the conversation?
Great. It's a great question. And I think we do have at least a set of design principles for addressing that. Number one, when it comes to goals, it's incredibly important, whether you're a parent or a boss, that the people who are moving toward those goals have a say in setting those goals. When goals are foisted on people, what you get is compliant behavior or defiant behavior. But when people have a say in fashioning the goals, they endorse the goals more strongly and are more likely to move toward them. So the idea that parents give their kids goals, or bosses give their employees goals, is detrimental. And so we should have goals. We should have relatively few goals, I think, because it's hard to keep that many priorities in mind. But the most important thing, and we know this from sports psychology, we know this from Carol Dweck, we know is to focus on the process rather than the outcome. Focus on the process rather than the outcome. So not, oh my God, you didn't get an A on that test. Focus on, did you prepare for that test? Did you study for that test? Were you diligent? Were you conscientious? Yeah, great. Sometimes these things don't work out. Focus on the process more than the outcome. Give people a say in setting their own goals. But I really don't like the idea of parents setting goals for their kids. Listen. That is not, if you'll borrow the phrase, how to raise an adult.
How to raise an adult. My final question, I'm going to turn it back over to Gilda after this, is, and the last 6 or 7 lines of your beautiful book, which everybody needs to be sure to buy, The Power of Regret by Dan Pink. You say a little bit about your own regrets, and you say, I regret not taking enough entrepreneurial and creative risks, not being as bold as my privilege allows and my heart desires. Now, ... stay tuned. Are you prepared to share with us what falls into the tuning that may come if we? I would
love to share with you. I just have nothing. And I think that, one of the things about, again, the personal side of this book is that, Julie, I would not have written this book in my 30s. I didn't have enough mileage on me. But in my 50s, it felt kind of inevitable, because I was at a point in my life, and maybe some of the parents in this audience are too, where suddenly, to my surprise, I look back and I'm like, holy crap, I have mileage on me. How did this happen? But then I sort of breathe a sigh of relief and I look forward and say, wait a second, I still got some time to go. What did I learn here that I can apply to that I can apply to the future? So this really made me reflect on my own regrets about not being bold enough. I have a lot of regrets about not being kind enough earlier in my life. And so I've really tried to turn that around as much as possible. And so when we do that, when we actually just sort of reckon with our regrets, I think that they give us the kind of the compass, the compass to lead a fulfilling and meaningful life. And when we do that, and our kids watch it, I think that they begin to develop the tools and the wherewithal to lead a meaningful and productive life of their own.
Wow, this has been rich.
Say one more thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Larson. I gotta say one last thing, which is I began to appreciate in my 40s, and I'm now 54, that my purpose in life is not to be perfect. My purpose is to continually learn and grow. And this beautiful book is a roadmap, very accessible for all of us, on how to be kind to ourselves, but also curious about our own growth, and really using our mistakes or our regrets as fuel for what we will do next. It is an incredible book, Dan, and it's been a pleasure to go with you. So back to you, Dr. Larson.
All right, Dan and Julie, thanks so much. This has been so rich, so deep, and just a fast hour, and great that we went over. I just got to mention in closing, we have a profile of the graduate, which is this effort to go with 6 competencies and descriptors and all these tools for staff to dig deeper beyond just the academic learning and delve into transformational skills. And you have covered so many skills for obviously adults, but for students as well. So thank you so much. We have this on tape, so I'm sure some of our staff will play it. And obviously those that listened in this evening, it's on tape, it's on the website. And let me turn it over to Gilda to have the last word.
How can you follow any of that, right? Just thanks to everybody for listening. And what a special, special hour. Come back to GPS. You'll always learn, and get these books. They're amazing from both of these authors. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilda. Thank you, Dr. Larson. And thank you, Julie. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
And tune in later next month for Anya and Jamil, who are both of whom are outstanding.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
looks like Madeline Levine is coming too, and she'll definitely
Yes.
talk about the squiggly zigzaggy line. That's one of her things. Thanks again. Great to be in Glenbard, in Chicagoland. Love y'all. Appreciate the opportunity. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great evening.